My name is Sarah Bennett, 34 years old, a technology engineer in Seattle, the kind of person who once believed that family was the safest place on earth. But that belief shattered the day I woke up after thyroid surgery, my neck wrapped in bandages, the hospital room cold and echoing, and realized that not a single member of my family had come to see me. 3 days later, when I could barely speak a full sentence, my mother sent a message. "Can you transfer $4,200 for Emily's wedding dress?" She found the perfect one. Not a single word asking how I felt, whether I could eat, whether I was okay. I stared at the message for a long time, then transferred exactly 50 cents with a note, "Buy a veil." Then I removed her access from the shared bank account, the one she had quietly used for years to withdraw my money. The next morning, my bank manager called to inform me that my mother was making a scene in the lobby. "If you were in my position, what would you have done? And where in the world are you watching this story from?" I first discovered the lump in my thyroid on a Monday morning, while the Seattle rain tapped steadily against the office window. The fatigue had been creeping in for weeks, but I'd blamed it on long hours and stress from my software engineering job. Then came the ultrasound, and the world seemed to freeze. The doctor looked at me over his glasses, his voice calm but firm. "Sarah, we need to schedule surgery soon. It could be benign, but we can't wait." The word surgery rang in my head like metal striking metal, sharp and unreal. Suddenly, there was a distance between me and reality, as if I were watching my own life from behind glass. The hospital scheduled the operation for October 10th at Swedish Medical Center, right in downtown Seattle, a place I had passed hundreds of times, but never imagined I would one day lie inside as a patient. That evening, I sat by the wooden table near my window, watching the city lights shimmer across the foggy surface of Lake Union, and I dialed the first number that came to mind, Mom. Margaret picked up after 2 rings. Her voice was the same as always, slightly rushed, slightly distant, like someone who was forever running late to something more important. I spoke slowly, trying to steady my voice. "Mom, I need thyroid surgery. They think it might be a tumor. The doctor says it has to be soon." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for me to count my heartbeat. Then she said, "Oh my God, how could this happen? But don't worry, I'll fly from Spokane to be with you. I'll stay by your side, sweetheart, I promise." For a moment, I actually believed her. I even noted down the flight she said she'd book. Then I moved on to the next call to my father. My father, Richard Bennett, lived in Tacoma with his new wife. When he heard the news, he let out a quiet sigh. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "I know you're strong. I'll bring those chocolate chip cookies you used to love when you were little." I could hear the faint sound of his car radio in the background and imagined him sitting in a parking lot somewhere, one hand holding a cup of coffee, the other resting on the steering wheel. I thanked him, then ended the call, trying not to think about all the other times he had promised to show up but never did. After that, I called Emily, my sister, who was in the middle of planning her wedding next month. Her voice burst through the receiver, bright and cheerful. "Oh my God, Sarah, are you okay? It must be a simple surgery, right?" I swallowed hard. "It's not too serious, but the doctor says I need to do it soon." There was a brief pause, then she said quickly, "I'll cancel my dress fitting that week. I'll be there. I promise." In the background, I heard someone call her name, followed by laughter, and the call ended abruptly. Finally, I called Daniel, my older brother in Portland. He's a civil engineer, the quiet and practical one in the family. When I told him, he didn't hesitate. "Okay, I'll drive up to Seattle. You don't have to worry about a thing." Hearing that gave me a small sense of relief, maybe because, out of everyone, Daniel was the only one who rarely promised something he didn't keep. After those 4 calls, my apartment fell into a strange kind of silence. The ticking of the wall clock echoed through the room, and I realized my hands were trembling, not because I was afraid of the surgery, but because deep down, I wasn't sure if they would actually come this time. For years, I had grown used to being the last thought in every family plan. When Emily got engaged, I was the one who paid the deposit for her engagement party. When our parents argued about money, I was the one who mailed them a check marked advance, so they wouldn't fall behind on payments. Every time, it was justified the same way. Sarah's doing better. She lives in Seattle, after all. And somehow I had convinced myself that love in a family was an unspoken exchange that, if I kept giving, someday, they would return that love and hold my hand when I needed them most. Maybe, in a quiet corner of my heart, I was still waiting for that moment. I stood up and opened the balcony door. The night air was cold and sharp. Across the street, I could see the warm glow from other apartments, people eating dinner, laughing, arguing, loving each other. And I felt, once again, like an outsider looking in. But I told myself softly, this time is different. They promised. I went back inside and started writing a small list: who would stay where, when they would arrive, what to prepare: cookies, medicine, taxi rides, and even the quilt my mother liked. I taped that list to the refrigerator, as if by writing it down, I could turn hope into something real. Before going to bed, I sent a message in our family group chat: October 10th is my surgery day. Thank you for being there for me this time. My father reacted with a small heart emoji. My mother replied, "Don't worry, sweetheart." Emily sent a wedding dress sticker, and Daniel simply left a thumbs up. I turned off my phone, pulled the blanket over myself, and pictured each of their faces, the people I had always believed were home. In that moment, I wanted so badly to believe that this time would be different. That when I opened my eyes after surgery, one of them would be there, holding my hand and whispering, "You're safe now." In the darkness, I murmured softly, a tired kind of prayer only a daughter who has waited too many times could understand. Maybe this time, they'll come. 3 days before the surgery, my small apartment in Queen Anne smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold coffee. I cleaned more carefully than usual, as if scrubbing the counters, rearranging the kitchen shelves, and organizing the insurance forms could somehow shrink the fear sitting quietly inside me. On the table lay a stack of documents: surgical consent forms, insurance agreements, emergency contact information. I had written my mother's name down, an old habit I couldn't seem to break, even though a quiet instinct in me whispered that she might not show up. I placed my spare keys on the kitchen counter, wrapped in a sticky note that read, "Mom, leaving this here for you. My bedroom's on the left. Don't forget to water the cactus." I stared at the note for a long moment, a small smile curving somewhere between amusement and sadness. I was preparing for her arrival as if I believed it was certain, even though deep down I already knew it wasn't. That afternoon, I called my mother. She answered immediately, her voice carried by the wind and faint chatter in the background. She was clearly outside. "Where are you, Mom?" I asked. "Oh, I'm at the mall with Emily. She's trying on wedding dresses. You know, next week's the big fitting." She laughed, her voice full of excitement, as if nothing in the world mattered more than that moment. I swallowed my sigh and tried to sound calm. "I just wanted to remind you the surgery's still scheduled for the 10th. Don't forget to book your flight soon." She replied distractedly, Yes, I know. I'll probably fly out on the night of the 9th. Oh, by the way, Sarah, don't you think $4,000 for a wedding dress is a bit much?" I told her to pick something simpler, but Emily said this one defines the day of her life. "What do you think?" Her words hung in the air. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, the invisible wound already throbbing before a scalpel ever touched it. Finally, I whispered, "Whatever makes her happy, Mom." She laughed softly. "That's right, you're always the reasonable one." And just like that, the call ended quick, shallow and impersonal, like a passing weather report. I stared at my phone as the screen went dark, then sank into the couch. For a brief moment, I wanted to call her back to say out loud that I was scared, that I just needed someone to be there when I woke up from surgery, to hear a familiar voice whisper, "You're okay." But I didn't. I never do. Ever since I was a child, I've been the one who is fine. I learned not to ask, not to bother, not to make anyone uncomfortable. Maybe that's why they all believed I truly didn't need anyone. That night, I opened my laptop, checked my work calendar, and sent an email to my manager requesting one more week of medical leave. In my inbox were a few messages from coworkers, simple words of concern, small notes wishing me a smooth recovery. And somehow, those messages, from people who shared no blood with me, felt more genuine than anything I had received from my own family. I smiled faintly, a quiet kind of gratitude mixed with sadness, then shut the laptop and walked toward the wooden shelf that held a few old framed photos. One of them was from when I was 18, standing in front of the University of Washington gate, holding my acceptance letter. I had waited all morning for my family to show up for the freshman welcome ceremony. They never did. My mother called later, her voice rushed and apologetic. "Sarah, it's your cousin's wedding today. I couldn't skip it, you understand, right?" I did. I always had to understand. I remember standing there in the courtyard, watching other students pose for pictures, their parents beaming with pride, bouquets in hand. And there I was, holding nothing but a letter that suddenly felt heavier than I could bear. From that day, I taught myself not to expect too much. But somehow, every time I reached a new milestone, a quiet part of me still whispered that maybe, next time, they would show up. Now, as I sat there thinking about it, I wasn't sure which frightened me more, the upcoming surgery, or the image of waking up afterward to an empty room. I wondered if they even remembered their promises. Maybe they'd just be late, I told myself. Emily might be busy. Mom probably caught up with wedding plans. Dad could be stuck in Tacoma, but surely, eventually, they'd come. I kept giving them excuses, because the alternative, the truth that I had been forgotten, was too painful to face. Night settled over the city, the streets below glowing under a soft mist. I brewed a cup of herbal tea and sat by the window. Down there, cars moved steadily, horns blaring, life carrying on as usual. But inside my apartment, there was only the sound of the clock ticking, patient and unbothered. I placed my hand gently over my neck, feeling my pulse, fear and resolve intertwined in each beat. Maybe that was the only thing I truly had control over now, the rhythm of my own heart. The note from my mother was still on the table. I looked at it again, at the handwriting that felt both warm and distant at the same time. Quietly, I whispered, "Mom, I really need you this time." But only the night wind answered. I lifted my eyes toward the sky outside, the whole city of Seattle wrapped in a thick shade of gray. Clouds drifted slowly past the Space Needle, and the lights reflecting off the lake below looked like 1,000 quiet eyes watching me from afar. In that moment, I wanted to believe, but I was afraid to. Half of my heart still hoped they would come. The other half was already bracing itself for what I had known all my life, the familiar absence that never failed to arrive. The morning of October 10th came wrapped in rain as thin as silk. I woke up at 5:30, before dawn. The air was damp and cold, seeping through the cracks of the window, leaving a misty film on the glass. I brewed a cup of coffee, took a few quick sips, and looked around my apartment, everything neatly arranged, ready for the day. The blanket folded. The hospital papers stacked carefully in a canvas bag. The spare keys still resting on the kitchen counter, a quiet reminder of someone I still hoped might come for them, but the door remained silent. No messages, no calls. I put on my coat, grabbed my small suitcase, and stepped outside. The rain against my skin felt like cold needles. Autumn in Seattle was always melancholic, but today it mirrored exactly what I felt inside, a shapeless kind of fear. The Swedish Medical Center rose through the fog like a block of white light. I stood beneath the sign for a moment, listening to the distant wail of an ambulance, then whispered to myself, "It's just surgery, Sarah." I tried to recall my mother's voice. "I'll fly from Spokane." Maybe she was on her way. Maybe by the time I got to the waiting area, they'd be there. That thought alone was enough to make my feet move forward. At the reception desk, a young nurse greeted me with a practiced smile and handed me a stack of forms: consent for surgery, authorization papers, risk disclosures. I held the pen, my hand trembling slightly. At the bottom of the page, a bold sentence caught my eye. Possible risks include loss of voice, nerve damage, or death. I stopped at the last word, staring at it. Death. Such a short word, yet it carried enough weight to make my chest tighten. I signed my name and tried not to think about it again. They led me into the pre-op room after that. Everything was white walls, sheets, light. Even the sound of the heart monitor was steady and clinical, like a ticking clock. I lay there in the hospital gown, an IV needle taped to my arm, staring at the ceiling. Beside me, an older woman had her husband sitting by her side, his hand wrapped around hers as he whispered something that made her laugh. Across from me, a young woman was video calling her mother, who kept repeating softly, "I love you, sweetheart. You'll be fine." I turned my head away, pretending to be calm, but my throat tightened. I reached for my phone from the pocket of my hospital bag. No new messages. No missed calls. Just one old notification from the family group chat, the message I had sent 2 days ago, still sitting there unanswered. I opened the chat window with my mother and typed a few words before erasing them. "Mom, I'm scared." I didn't send it. Somewhere across the state, they were probably getting ready for Emily's dress fitting. I pictured them standing under the warm lights of a boutique, Emily twirling in a white gown, my mother smiling proudly, my father perhaps snapping photos on his phone. Maybe they just lost track of time. Maybe it was all a coincidence. I tried to convince myself of that. But the more I thought about it, the tighter my chest became, as if someone were quietly draining the air from my lungs. The door opened, and Dr. Collins, my surgeon, stepped in. He had been overseeing my case from the beginning. His tone was calm, reassuring, almost gentle. "Sarah, this is a straightforward procedure. We'll remove the nodule and send it for biopsy. If we're lucky, it'll be benign, and you'll recover quickly." I nodded, forcing a smile. He flipped through my chart, then looked up and asked, "Do you have someone with you today?" For a moment, I froze. 1 second stretched into a minute. Then I said, "Yes, they're on their way." He smiled politely, didn't press further, and told the nurse to begin preparing me for surgery. I glanced at my phone again. Still silent. I dialed my mother's number. 1 ring, 2, 3, and then it went to voicemail. I bit my lip and tried my father. "The number you are calling is currently busy." I called Emily next. "The user you are trying to reach is unavailable." I let the phone slip from my hand and land softly on the blanket. Staring at the ceiling, I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, but with the quiet finality of something that couldn't be undone. A nurse named Maria came over, her voice soft and kind. "Are you ready, Sarah?" I nodded, though no one is ever truly ready to have their neck cut open. As the bed began to roll forward, the wheels humming against the tile, I watched faces blur past, some anxious, some tearful, some holding the hands of the ones they loved. And then there was me, accompanied only by the rhythm of my own heartbeat blending with the steady pulse of the machines. Just before the operating room doors closed, I stopped Maria for a moment. "If anything happens," I said quietly, "call me. Me first." She looked puzzled, then nodded after a brief pause. I smiled this time, my lips didn't tremble. Maybe that was the moment I finally understood that no matter who showed up or didn't, I was the only one responsible for myself. As they placed the anesthesia mask over my face, the sharp, chemical scent made me dizzy. I heard the doctor's voice fading into the hum of the machines. "Count back from 10, Sarah." I began. 10, 9, 8. The sound of rain blended with the slow beep of the monitors. And in that fragile space between waking and sleep, one thought floated through my mind: maybe they would still come, just a little late. Then everything faded into white. When I woke up, the world was still white, just as it had been before I drifted under anesthesia, but this time it was a dim, sterile kind of white, cold and piercing to the eyes. My throat burned, and every breath felt like a small blade slicing through the inside of my neck. I tried to move. The tug of the IV needle against my skin sent sharp pain rippling down my arm. Somewhere nearby, a steady machine beeped in rhythm, my heartbeat. Still here, still mine. I forced my eyes wider, realizing I was in the recovery room. There was no voice calling my name, no hand holding mine, no familiar face leaning over me. just the blank white ceiling and the sound of gurney wheels rolling past in the hallway. I turned my head slightly toward the bed beside me. An older man was waking up, his wife sitting next to him, clutching his hand, tears streaming down her cheeks as the doctor whispered something that made her smile through her sobs. Across the aisle, a young woman held a bouquet of red roses. Her father was recording a video, and her mother stood proudly by her side, beaming with relief. Beside my bed, there was only a plastic cup of water and a folded sheet of post-surgery instructions. I stared at the black letters on the white paper, unable to focus on a single line. A nurse walked by and noticed I was awake. She smiled warmly. "Miss Bennett, you're awake. Congratulations." "The surgery went well," Dr. Collins said. "The nodule was benign, no sign of cancer." I nodded faintly, my lips trembling. The word benign rang in my mind, like a distant bell, something that should have brought me peace, yet all it did was make my chest ache. "Did anyone come to see me?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse and brittle, barely more than air. She glanced down at the clipboard in her hand, then shook her head softly. "No, there's no one listed. But maybe they're on their way." I pressed my lips together and turned toward the door. It stood slightly ajar, painted white, beyond it a long corridor filled with passing footsteps. I tried to picture it, my mother walking in, rain on her coat, her familiar perfume filling the air as she apologized for missing her flight, my father carrying a box of chocolate chip cookies, smiling awkwardly. Emily arriving in her sequin dress, saying, "I'm so sorry, I got here as soon as I could." But no one came. Only the wind whispered through the narrow window frame, carrying the damp chill of the Seattle rain into the silent room. When the nurse left, I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my hand trembling slightly as the IV line tugged against my skin. The screen lit up, and a string of unread messages appeared from the family group chat. My pulse slowed as I opened it. There were no words asking, "Are you awake?" or "How are you feeling?" Only photos. Emily stood in a bridal boutique, twirling in front of a mirror, her dress glowing under soft lights. My mother was beside her, smiling brightly, a latte cup in hand. Another photo followed, the two of them taking a cheerful selfie. My mother's caption read, "Final dress fitting before the big day. Feeling blessed for moments like this." Below it, my father had reacted with a red heart. Daniel had commented, "You look amazing, little sis." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My throat tightened as if invisible fingers were pressing against it, and my heart felt impossibly heavy. I touched the bandage on my neck. It burned beneath my fingertips, damp with antiseptic, and placed the phone on my chest. Tears came quietly, not in sobs but in silence, slipping down my cheeks and soaking into the pillow, warm at first and then cold. I wanted to type something, just a simple message. "I just got out of surgery." But I couldn't. They were happy, I told myself. I shouldn't ruin that. Maybe tomorrow they'd remember. Maybe they still thought I was strong, like always. I closed my eyes and let the tears keep falling, each one tracing a path down my face before disappearing into the white fabric beneath me. From the bed beside mine came laughter, then the sound of a door opening and a cheerful voice calling, "Mom, look." I turned my face away. And in that small, hollow moment, I understood something I had never wanted to admit, that there is no loneliness deeper than waking up in this world and realizing that the people you love most are not there. Not one of them. I lay still, listening to the rhythm of my heartbeat blending with the hum of the machines, and whispered inside my mind, "It's okay, Sarah, you survived. Like you always do." By afternoon, Dr. Collins stopped by to check on me. His voice was warm. "You're very lucky. Everything went better than expected. We'll keep you overnight just for observation." I thanked him, forcing a small smile, though my lips were cracked and dry. After he left, I turned back to my phone again. The newest message from my mother appeared in the group chat. "Emily says the boutique is offering a discount if we place the order today. What great news." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I pressed and held my thumb against it and selected Mute Notifications. The screen went dark. In the quiet of the hospital room, Only the sound of my own breathing remained slow, heavy, real. I turned toward the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the frosted glass, blurring into streaks that looked like falling tears. I thought of all the times I had forgiven them, the times I had tried to understand, the times I had said, "It's okay," when they forgot my birthday, when they asked me to pay off their credit cards, when they placed a wedding above everything else. I had always believed that if I was good enough, patient enough, loving enough, they would eventually learn how to love me too. But that morning, waking alone in a hospital bed, I finally understood that moment would never come. I set my phone down on the table, buried my face in the pillow, and let the last tear fall, disappearing into its warmth. Then I closed my eyes. I stopped letting myself hope, stopped waiting for footsteps in the hallway. In the quiet that followed, sharp and hollow, one thought surfaced in my mind: maybe silence itself is an answer. 3 days after the surgery, I was discharged. My neck was still wrapped in bandages, my voice rough and fragile, like someone who had lived through a long, wordless winter. The doctor told me to rest, take my medication, and avoid stress. I returned to my apartment in Queen Anne, where the air was cold and still enough that I could hear the heater ticking on and off. The cactus on the windowsill was still alive, untouched for days, maybe because it was like me, surviving on neglect, sustained by its own dryness. I sat down on the sofa, pulled a blanket over my knees, and tried to feel relieved. The tumor was benign, I was safe. But the relief didn't come. Instead, a heavy emptiness settled inside me. The ache in my throat was nothing compared to the deeper pain twisting in my chest, the kind that comes from being left behind, without a reason you can understand. By late afternoon, the fog rolled thick over Seattle. I poured myself a cup of tea, reached for the speaker to play some music, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Mom. My heart jumped, she remembered. Finally. I opened the message, my hands trembling slightly. But the words on the screen made my pulse stop. "Can you transfer $4,200 for Emily's wedding dress? She found the perfect one. We're all pitching in as a family. No, how are you feeling? No. Did the surgery go well? Just a number and a request." The message was tidy, efficient, cold as an invoice. I stared at the screen for several seconds before a laugh escaped me, hoarse, cracked, half choked by tears. I sat there, my body still weak from medication, trying to picture my mother writing that text. Maybe she was at the bridal boutique, her face glowing as Emily smiled at herself in the mirror. Maybe they were talking about lace and ivory shades and lighting, while I, the daughter who had just come out of neck surgery, was reduced to the family's old ATM machine that still happened to work. I opened my banking app. The balance appeared, $38,012.57. I knew every dollar of it: the overtime hours, the projects I'd taken on for coworkers, the weekends I'd given up to meet deadlines. My mother had been added to this account years ago, back in college, just in case of emergencies. And I'd believed her. I'd always believed her. But maybe that trust was the very thing that had cost me the one thing I'd been too naive to protect all these years: the right to be respected. I tapped on the transfer option. Amount: $0.50. Note: by a veil. My finger hovered for a second before pressing confirm. The screen lit up: transaction successful. I let out a small laugh, something between bitter and relieved. In that moment, I could feel it clearly: the last thread that had bound me to them, thin but unbreakable for so many years, had finally been cut. I sat still for a long time, listening to the sound of rain growing heavier against the roof. Each drop felt like a quiet reminder. It's time, Sarah. I reopened my banking app and scrolled to the section labeled Manage Authorized Users. The name Margaret Bennett was still there, next to the line that read Authorized User, Emergency Access. I stared at it for what felt like minutes. For years, I'd left it untouched, believing that someday she might truly need it, and I'd find peace in knowing I could help. But now, I understood her version of emergency had never meant sickness, fear, or a daughter lying on an operating table. Her emergencies were always about dresses, deposits, and anything that had to do with Emily. I took a deep breath and tapped Remove Access. A message appeared. Are you sure you want to revoke this permission? I pressed yes. A soft chime followed, and then her name disappeared from the list. Just like that. Lightness. Emptiness. It felt like pulling out a thorn that had been lodged too deep, painful at first, but freeing once it was gone. I leaned my head back against the couch, exhaled slowly, and for the first time in years, the air around me didn't feel quite so heavy. That night, I didn't turn on the TV or play music. I simply sat by the window, watching the city through the dim light. My reflection stared back at me, on the glass tired, neck wrapped in white bandages, but with eyes that looked different now. There was no longing left in them. No desperate need to find reasons to forgive. I picked up my phone again, opened my mother's message, read it one last time, and set it down. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. In the silence of that apartment, a decision took shape inside me, quiet but unshakable. From this moment on, no one would touch what I built. Not my money, not my time, not my kindness. Everything I had, I would finally use to sustain myself. My neck still ached, but my breathing felt deeper, fuller. And softly, to no one but myself, I whispered, "Enough, Sarah. That's enough." Outside, Seattle was still raining, the fine drizzle tapping against the window pane in a steady rhythm, like a clock counting down to a new life. And I knew that when morning came, I would no longer be the same woman I had been, the one who waited for messages, who paid for everyone else, who forgave too easily. I would still be alone, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, I was still sitting by the window, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands. My neck throbbed faintly, but the sleep I'd had was the first peaceful one in months. I thought I'd spend the day in silence, reading, listening to music, letting everything fade. But then the phone rang, its sound slicing through the quiet like an alarm. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar name, James Carter, Chase Bank, Seattle branch. I froze for a moment, then answered. A man's voice came through, calm and professional. "Good morning. Is this Miss Sarah Bennett?" "Yes, it is. This is James Carter, branch manager at Chase Bank downtown. I'm calling because your mother, Mrs. Margaret Bennett, is currently here at our customer service desk. She's requesting to reinstate her access to your account ending in 4521. I tightened my grip on the coffee cup, feeling the heat spread through my palm. "What did she say?" "She claims the account is a family fund and that your decision to revoke her access was made in error. Of course, we can't proceed without your direct authorization, which is why I'm reaching out for confirmation. It's not no 85 thing." I took a slow breath, a cold chill crawling down my spine. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. And to save you the trouble, that account belongs entirely to me. Every dollar in it is from my salary and my personal savings." There was a brief pause, then his voice softened. "I understand, Miss Bennett. However, your mother seems quite determined. She said that if I called you, you'd change your mind. Would you like to speak with her directly? She's standing right here." I leaned back in my chair. Inside me, two opposing instincts collided. One part of me wanted to hang up, to walk away and never look back. The other knew that if I didn't face this now, they would keep crossing the line, over and over, until there was nothing left of my boundaries. "Put her on," I said slowly, each word deliberate. There was a shuffle on the other end, then my mother's voice burst through the speaker, loud, sharp, almost shouting. "Sarah, what on earth are you doing? You had no right to lock that account. That's family money, do you hear me? We've all been contributing to that for years." I closed my eyes, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Mom, that account is mine. Every cent in it came from my paychecks. I went through every transaction. There's not a single deposit from anyone else." "Don't talk back to me like that," she snapped. "Do you have any idea Emily needs that money for her wedding deposit? Stop being so selfish. Family means sharing, not hiding money and punishing us like this." Her breath came through the line, fast and furious, mixed with the background noise of the bank voices, doors sliding open, the clatter of a keyboard. She was making a scene. I spoke slowly, clearly, so each word cut through the air like glass. No, Mom, this isn't sharing. This is exploitation. I've worked myself to exhaustion for 10 years sending money, helping everyone while when I was lying on an operating table, no one even asked if I was okay. You call that a family fund? Then, where was this family when I needed them? There was a pause. I could hear her inhale sharply before she spoke again, her voice trembling, brittle with resentment. You've changed, Sarah. Money has made you cold. You've forgotten who gave you life, who paid for your education. De dan the stide aan not of the faun in consto in finkturn martistam. I answered quietly, but with a finality that left no room for negotiation. No, Mom. You're the one who forgot. You forgot that I'm your daughter, not an ATM. And today, I'm taking back control of my life, something I should have done a long time ago. Silence fell on the line. I could picture her face, the wide eyes, the trembling mouth, the mix of anger and disbelief. She wasn't used to hearing no from me. Finally, she spat out, her voice cracking with rage. Fine, keep it. You'll see who you need when everything falls apart. Then the line went dead. The metallic echo of the phone slamming down rang in my ear long after the call ended. James Carter came back on the line, his voice soft but still polite. I'm sorry about that situation, Miss Bennett. I just wanted to reconfirm the account is solely in your name, with no co-owners. Mrs. Margaret's access has been permanently revoked. Would you like us to place a note on the file that no one is permitted to change this information without your presence? I took a deep breath. Yes, please do that. And thank you, Mr. Carter. I know this isn't an easy situation to handle. He replied gently, no problem. I just wanted to say, sometimes protecting yourself isn't selfish. Then the call ended. I set the phone down and leaned back into the chair. My heart pounded fast and chaotic, but there was a strange calm inside me. I knew I had crossed a line I'd been too afraid to cross for 34 years. I touched the stitch at my throat. It ached faintly, a reminder that pain can be the start of healing. I rested my head against the window frame and closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. I felt free. And a little afraid. Freedom often comes with loneliness. But even afraid, I knew I would not turn back. Not ever again. The next afternoon, the sky remained a flat, pewter gray, but the light reflecting off Lake Union lit my window in a way that made everything sharper and impossible to ignore. I had just poured a cup of herbal tea and was writing a few lines for a work project when someone began knocking at my door. At first it was tentative, then it grew louder and more insistent, like someone beating out their anger on the wood. I peeked through the peephole and saw Emily, her hair a mess, her wool coat dripping, her face flushed red. I stayed still and didn't open the door. My heart raced, but there was a steadiness under it, as if I had been bracing for this moment for a long time. The knocking resumed, this time with shouting mixed in. Sarah, open the door. Mom told me about this morning. What the hell are you doing? She yelled. I kept silent. She went on, her voice rising, breaking with fury. Do you know what you've done? You ruined everything. The boutique refused to hold the dress without the deposit yesterday. Mom says you locked the account and now everyone had to take out loans. What are you trying to do? Get revenge on me? I stood close to the door, listening to her heavy breathing on the other side. My hand trembled slightly, not out of fear but out of exhaustion. Exhausted from every time I'd had to play the role of the responsible sister. Emily's voice rose again, hoarse now, scraping against the silence between us. Mom said you owe me. You've had it easy, Sarah. You've got a job, a big salary, no kids to raise, no wedding to pay for. While I've been struggling to build a life. How can you be so selfish? Family means helping each other. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. An easier life. The words almost made me laugh, but I couldn't. Easy? Was it easy paying my own tuition, covering my own hospital bills, waking up from surgery to an empty room while they were shopping for wedding dresses? If that's what easy looks like, then maybe I'd rather have suffered a little more just to have someone ask, "Are you okay?" I didn't open the door. She knocked a few more times, then went silent. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall, the soft ding of the elevator, and then the apartment fell quiet again. I exhaled deeply, walked back to my chair, and reached for my tea, but before I could touch it, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I knew that if I didn't answer, he'd just keep calling. So, I picked up. His voice was rough, sharper than usual. What the hell are you doing, Sarah? Mom just called me crying. You embarrassed her at the bank and now Emily lost her wedding dress. You've gone too far. Daniel, I said softly. All I did was take back control of my own money. Control? He snapped. You're being selfish. Families share. Everyone's struggling. Mom doesn't have a job, Emily's getting married, and you're living comfortably in Seattle. Helping out a little isn't such a big deal. I let out a small laugh, one that cracked in my throat. A little? Do you even remember the last time I asked anyone in this family for help? Or, when I was in the hospital, did anyone even ask if I was alive? I didn't wait for his answer. My voice was calm, steady. I don't owe anyone, Daniel. Not Mom, not Emily, not you. If our family only exists when I'm paying for it, then it isn't a family at all. There was silence for a few seconds. Then, his tone dropped, low and bitter. You've changed, Sarah. You're not the kind sister you used to be. And Aros had a Diktonov had. I replied quietly, maybe I've just finally become myself. I hung up before he could say another word. The screen went dark, and in its reflection, I saw my own face staring back tired, hollow-eyed, but strangely calm. That night, just when I thought the storm had passed, an email arrived from my father, Richard Bennett. The subject line read, "You've hurt your mother." I opened it and read each line slowly. Sarah, your mother's been crying all day. I don't know what happened between you two, but the way you treated her was cruel. No matter what, she's still your mother. I don't agree with you cutting her off or locking the account. Family is blood and you can't just think about yourself. I'm disappointed in you. Remember, you're part of us, and you have responsibilities to this family. Richard. When I finished reading, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. Just a cold emptiness spreading through my chest. Family responsibility, he had called it. But I wondered, where was love in that equation? Where was love when they left their daughter alone in a hospital bed? I opened my phone again, dozens of unread messages from Emily, from Daniel, from my mother, even from a few relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Every message sounded the same: blame, accusation, guilt. Not a single one asked, "Are you okay?" Not one. I began to scroll through them, and one by one, I deleted everything: texts, emails, missed calls. Each time my thumb hit delete, it felt like lifting a stone off my chest, one by one, until I could breathe again. When the screen finally went blank, I set the phone down on the table and stood up. The wind outside was picking up, rattling the windows, making the curtains billow. I pushed the window open wide. The cold air rushed in, slicing through the thin fabric of my shirt, but it made me feel awake, alive. From my apartment on Queen Anne Hill, I could see the city below, cars moving, people walking, life going on, needing no explanation, no permission. I stood there for a long time, letting the wind tangle my hair, sweep away the faint sterile scent that still clung to my clothes from the hospital. Inside me, I heard a soft sound, not a sob, but something breaking loose. Maybe it was guilt, the kind that had wrapped itself around my heart for half a lifetime. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, instead of wishing they would understand me, I whispered quietly to myself. Silence is also an answer. And today, I've given mine. I spent all of Sunday cutting every remaining thread. First, I blocked my mother's number, then Emily's, Daniel's, and finally my father's. Next came email accounts, then social media. I removed them from my friends list, deleted every old comment, every family photo I had once kept as proof that once, maybe, there had been love. But as I pressed delete, all I felt was relief. It was as if a door that had been cracked open for years had finally been shut firmly, completely. I knew they would call me cruel, ungrateful, heartless. They'd say I had lost my sense of family. But maybe, I thought, Sometimes the only cruelty you truly need is the kind you use to protect yourself from the people who learn to weaponize love just to keep you guilty. On Monday, I went back to work at South Lake Union Tech, the company I'd been with for 7 years. Everything looked the same: the light wooden desk, the laptop, the small plant by the window, and the framed photo of a sunrise over Gasworks Park I'd taken last year. I tried to focus on reports, but the dull ache in my neck lingered, a quiet reminder of everything that had just happened. Around noon, during a project meeting, the front desk called my internal line. "Sarah," the receptionist said hesitantly, "there's someone named Margaret Bennett here in the lobby. She says she's your mother and wants to see you urgently." My whole body went still. I took a slow breath to steady myself before answering, "Thank you. Please tell her I'm in a meeting. If she insists on waiting, could you ask Chris from security to escort her out?" There was a pause on the line, then a soft, "Understood." 20 minutes later, Chris knocked gently on my office door. He looked uncomfortable. "Miss Bennett, she's left now," he said. "Before she did, she asked me to tell you, you can't hide forever." I nodded once. "Thank you, Chris." The rest of the afternoon, my hands trembled each time they touched the keyboard. Part of me felt humiliated knowing she had shown up at my workplace, drawing attention, making people whisper, but another part of me felt grounded. Because I knew that if I cracked the door open again, even just a little, they'd walk through and take everything: my money, my self-respect, the fragile peace I'd fought so hard to reclaim. 3 days later, an email arrived from Emily, sent to my work address. The subject line contained only 3 words: "Please meet me." "Ended money." I hovered over the delete button but hesitated. The message was brief. "Sarah, please give me one chance to talk. Just once. Rue 43 Cafe, Capitol Hill, Thursday, 10 a.m. I stared at it for a long time. A small part of me, stubborn and naive, still wanted to believe there was something genuine left in my sister. So, in the end, I agreed. Thursday arrived with rare clear skies over Seattle. I got to the cafe 10 minutes early and chose a seat by the window where the morning light slanted across the wooden table. When Emily walked in, I barely recognized her. Her face was drawn, her eyes swollen, lipstick smudged. She looked around until she saw me, then forced a thin, uneasy smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting down, her fingers twisting together. I never meant to hurt you." Her voice shook not from sorrow, but from fear of being confronted. I met her eyes, calm but unwavering. "Never meant to?" "I was lying on an operating table, sedated, and I woke up alone. While you were trying on wedding dresses. That's what you call not meaning to?" Emily lowered her head, and this time the tears were real, falling fast down her cheeks. I know I was wrong. But at the time, Mom said the surgery wasn't serious. I thought you didn't need anyone there. You've always been the strong one, Sarah. Ever since we were kids, you've always handled everything on your own." I let out a quiet laugh, the sound rough and strained from the ache in my throat. "Strong? Do you think I had a choice?" I said softly. "When Mom cried, who comforted her? When Dad left, who cleaned up the mess? When you lost your job, who sent the money? And when I was lying on an operating table, terrified I might not wake up, who was there for me?" I met her eyes, my voice steady but cold. "Tell me, Emily, who was there for me?" She didn't answer. The only sound between us was the faint clink of a spoon against a coffee cup somewhere across the cafe. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I watched her shoulders tremble before she broke into quiet sobs. There was a time when I might have reached across the table, taken her hand, told her it was okay. But that part of me no longer existed. I just looked at her without anger, without pity, just an aching emptiness. "Sarah," she said through tears, "you can't shut us out forever. No matter what, we're still family." I replied quietly, my tone low and even, like wind moving past a window pane. "Family doesn't mean I have to keep hurting myself so everyone else can stay comfortable. If family only knows how to take and never give, then it stops being family." I stood up, picked up my bag and placed a bill on the table for the coffee. Emily looked up at me, her eyes swollen, her lips trembling. "So you really can't forgive me?" she asked. I paused for a heartbeat, then said softly, "It's not that I can't forgive you, it's that I no longer need to." I walked out of the cafe and stepped into the street. The Seattle sky was a rare, clear blue, the air tinged with the scent of roasted coffee and dry maple leaves. I stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the cold air settle against my skin. Behind me, I knew she was still sitting there, crying, but her tears didn't make me feel lighter or heavier. I moved forward, blending into the current of strangers. My heart felt hollow, yet peaceful. I no longer waited for an apology, an acknowledgement, or an overdue embrace. Everything I needed, I already had: silence. And in that silence, for the first time, I felt truly alive. I began rebuilding my life with small rituals, things I'd never made time for before, or never believed I deserved. Every morning, I rose early, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and took a slow walk around Lake Union while the water still shimmered with morning mist. Joggers passed by, dogs shook droplets from their fur, kayaks sliced through the still surface, and all of it reminded me of something simple yet profound: life doesn't stop for anyone. It keeps moving, whether we're broken or not. And maybe, I thought, the best thing we can do is learn how to move with it rather than against it. One morning in Fremont, I wandered into a small yoga studio tucked inside an alley lined with lavender. I had always thought yoga was something luxurious, reserved for people with time to spare, but the instructor, a silver-haired woman named Eliza, smiled at me and said, "Sometimes the greatest luxury is simply giving yourself permission to breathe." I signed up for a beginner's class, 3 sessions a week. The first day, I was stiff and awkward, my neck still sore whenever I tilted my head back. But after a few weeks, my breathing began to slow, to steady. And every time I lay still in the final pose, Shavasana, eyes closed, hands relaxed at my sides, I could feel my heart growing lighter. It was there, in that yoga class, that I ran into Mia, a former coworker from the design team at the company. She recognized me first, her face lighting up with surprise. "Sarah? Wow, it's been forever." After class, we walked to a nearby cafe, and our conversation flowed easily, as if no time had passed. Mia told me she had also cut contact with her parents after years of control and emotional abuse. "I used to think I was the worst daughter in the world," she said, stirring her coffee. "But then I realized sometimes, loving yourself is the only way to break the cycle." Was this think space for mill-sided? Listening to her, I saw a reflection of myself in her story: the same fear, the same guilt, the same hollow space inside that longed to be filled with something kind. We grew close quickly. We practiced yoga together, walked around the lake, and shared the kinds of truths most people never say out loud: the silent dinners, the text messages from mothers who only reached out to ask for money, the way the word family could be used like a weapon to make you feel small. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Mia didn't pity me, she understood me. And in that understanding, there was something warm, something steady. It felt like a home I'd never had. One afternoon, Mia invited me to join a community therapy group for adults raised in toxic families. I hesitated, afraid of what it would mean to speak the truth out loud, to hear my own pain in words. But she said gently, "They won't judge you, Sarah. They'll just listen." So I went. At the first meeting, I sat in a circle of 12 people and could barely breathe. The facilitator, a soft-spoken woman named Joanna, invited each of us to share what had brought us there. When my turn came, my hands were ice cold. I began slowly, haltingly, but once I started, everything poured out: the surgery, the wedding dress message, my mother shouting at me over the phone at the bank. When I finally finished, the room fell silent for a few seconds. Then Joanna looked at me and said, quietly but firmly, "Thank you for trusting us with that. Now, take a deep breath, Sarah. You survived." I broke down in tears, but not the kind that come from pain. It was the kind that come when someone finally acknowledges that your pain is real. Around the circle, people nodded in quiet understanding. A middle-aged man said softly, "I get it. I was also the only child my parents never visited when I was in the hospital. His words made the tears spill faster. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed for being the one who had been left behind. In the sessions that followed, I began to share more and to listen more. I realized there was an entire community of people like me, people who had loved deeply and received only coldness in return. We started calling ourselves the Free Children. Between the sessions, we learned what forgiveness truly meant, not as an invitation for those who hurt us to return, but as a way of freeing ourselves so that we could walk away. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and created a small blog. I called it Healing the Unchosen Family. My first post was titled, "The Day I Woke Up After Surgery and Realized No One Was There." I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't assign blame. I just told the truth: the silence of that hospital room, the wedding dress text, the 50-cent transfer with a note by a veil. I wrote in my most honest voice, without anger, without bitterness, just the quiet exhaustion of someone who had finally stopped pretending to be okay, and the faint hope that if anyone out there was going through the same thing, they'd know they weren't alone. I published it around midnight and went to bed, thinking nothing of it. But the next morning, my phone exploded. Hundreds of shares, thousands of comments from strangers around the world. This is my story. Thank you for putting into words what I never could. I woke up alone in a hospital, too. People began sending me emails, stories about their mothers, their fathers, their attempts to set boundaries without being branded as ungrateful. I read every message, crying and smiling at once. For the first time, my pain felt useful. I wasn't just surviving it anymore, I was turning it into something that mattered, something that reached others. I kept writing, week after week. Each post became a small chapter of my healing. From cutting ties, to finding peace, to discovering freedom. One morning, sitting with Mia at our usual cafe, she looked at me and smiled. "Sarah," she said, "you realize something? You don't talk to them anymore, but I've never seen you look so alive. And it's Sunday." I laughed, glancing out the window where sunlight pooled across the table, warm and golden against my coffee cup. "Maybe," I said quietly, "I've finally learned that family isn't where we're born, it's where we're heard." And in that moment, I understood life never asked me to forget the pain. It only asked me to learn how to turn that pain into light. 3 months passed since the night I published my first blog post. Seattle had settled into winter, the maple trees outside my windows stood bare, and the morning fog over Lake Union was so thick it blurred the line between water and sky. My days found a rhythm again: yoga, work, writing, and the quiet comfort of therapy group sessions. The pain in my neck had faded to a soft ache, leaving behind a thin scar so small it could be mistaken for nothing, yet enough to remind me that I had survived the storm. That morning, when I stepped outside to check the mail, I noticed a thick brown envelope heavier than usual. In the corner was handwriting I hadn't seen in years: R. Bennett. I froze. My father never wrote letters. For years, his messages had come as brief texts, mostly to ask for help. "Can you send your mother some money?" Or, "Take Emily to her appointment, will you?" But now, in the cold of winter, a handwritten letter from him made something deep inside me ache. I carried it inside, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. Inside was a check for $4,200 and a folded page, smelling faintly of old paper and cigarette smoke. His handwriting was steady, leaning slightly to the right. "Sarah, I know you'll be surprised to receive this. I've been quiet for the past 3 months, not out of anger, but because I didn't know how to say anything you'd want to hear. Your mother still doesn't understand, and maybe she never will, that you don't owe anyone anything. I chose the wrong side. More than once. I let your mother and Emily make decisions for all of us, and I thought staying silent meant keeping peace. But I see now silence can also be complicity. When you were in the hospital, I knew. Your mother told me not to bother you, said you were fine, said everyone was busy, and I agreed. That was my biggest mistake. Because I should have been there not as the one paying bills, but as a father holding his daughter's hand when she was afraid. This check isn't to buy forgiveness. It's just my way of taking back a small piece of responsibility that I let go of too easily. You can tear it up, donate it, do whatever you want with it. But please keep this letter. Let it remind you that your father remembers his failures, and he's still learning how to do better. Your father? Richard. I read it twice. Then, a third time. By the end, the words blurred, not from sadness, but from the quiet recognition that even regret, when it's real, can sound like love trying to find its way back. I read it over and over, every single word. At first, no tears came, only a thick, heavy silence that filled the room. With each reread, my throat tightened a little more, as if the child inside me, the one who used to wait for him at school recitals, who once stood under the rain, hoping he'd show up, was finally hearing the apology she had waited for her entire life. I set the check aside and looked down at the letter, my hands trembling slightly. In those uneven lines of ink, I saw something real. No embellishment, no excuses, just a man learning, too late, how to say I'm sorry. That afternoon, I went to the cafe in Fremont where Mia and I met every Friday. She saw the envelope in my hand and asked, "What's that?" I placed the letter on the table and slid it toward her. She read quickly, then looked up, her eyes warm. "Sarah," she said, "this is what you always wished to hear, isn't it?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, but strangely, I don't feel happy or relieved. Just calm." Mia took a sip of coffee before answering. "Sometimes forgiveness isn't a feeling. It's a decision. Maybe you don't want to let them back into your life, but the fact that you could read that letter without shaking or getting angry, that is a kind of forgiveness." I looked out the window. "I don't want to take the money, Mia. Not because of pride. Just, if I do, it turns this letter into a transaction. And I want to keep it as something honest." She nodded. "Then don't return it and don't spend it. Keep it as proof that someone can change. Proof for you that everything you went through meant something." I returned home as twilight fell. The streetlights shimmered across the surface of the lake like scattered glass. I opened my desk drawer, placed the check inside a small envelope, and laid the letter on top. Under the warm yellow light, my father's handwriting bled faintly into the paper, but I saw it clearer than ever. I closed the drawer, took a deep breath, and smiled. That night, I called Mia on video. She was wrapped in a blanket, smiling. "You look lighter than yesterday," she said. I nodded. "I think I finally understand something. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It just means you stop letting them hurt you anymore." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's the hardest part, Sarah. But that's what real freedom looks like." After the call ended, I stepped out onto the balcony and looked up at the Seattle night, dark, deep, and still. I thought about my father, about those who still couldn't face their own mistakes, and about the daughter they once left alone in a hospital bed. And I realized that maybe justice isn't hearing an apology, it's reaching the moment when your heart no longer needs one. That night, in the cold hush of the city, I knew I had just taken one more step on the long road toward healing. On the day Emily got married, a thin rain fell over Seattle, just like the day I was wheeled into surgery years ago. I didn't learn about the wedding through an invitation, but through the flood of photos on social media. Emily, in a pristine white lace gown, sunlight catching her blonde hair, making her look like she'd stepped out of a film. Under the photo, my mother had commented, "The happiest day of my daughter's life." My father left a red heart. Daniel wrote, "The most beautiful bride I've ever seen." I looked at it all and felt nothing sharp. No sting, no jealousy, no ache. Just the quiet recognition that I was watching an old movie, one I used to cry over, but now could sit through calmly because I already knew the ending. I closed my laptop, made a cup of tea, and returned to my desk. The window was slightly open, letting in the damp scent of soil and fallen maple leaves. My work had been going well these past few months, the new software project was approved, and my team had been praised for its performance. But what I was most proud of wasn't the job, it was healing the unchosen family. The blog had surpassed 100,000 readers, and each week I still received letters from strangers. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't. Your story gave me the courage to stand up." Some told me they had finally left their parents' house after 20 years of silence. Others said they had learned to say no for the first time. Each message felt like a piece of myself being gently returned, pieces I thought I'd lost forever. I no longer wrote about my family directly. Instead, I wrote about recovery, about the first morning I woke up without crying, about learning to cook just for myself, about opening the window and feeling sunlight truly enter the room. Small things, maybe. But for me, they were the new definition of happiness. One weekend afternoon, I drove to Lake Washington. The sky was clear for once, no rain, only gold light spilling over the horizon. The sunset stretched across the lake, the water glimmering like shards of glass. I stood on the wooden pier, wrapped in a thick sweater, holding a paper cup of coffee. The wind blew hard, carrying the scent of salt and the sound of waves striking the hulls of boats. I closed my eyes and let it all blur together. For months, I hadn't spoken to my family. No calls, no messages. And strangely, my life didn't feel emptier because of it. It just felt quieter, neater, lighter. I remembered something Joanna, my group facilitator, once said: healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with it without letting it hurt you anymore. I thought about that as I gazed down at the water. Beneath the reflection was a depth I couldn't see, dark and endless, but on the surface, it was still, bright and calm. Maybe that was who I had become. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope, the letter from my father, the one I had kept tucked in my drawer for the past 3 months. I unfolded it one last time, my fingers trembling slightly in the wind. The words blurred in the amber light of sunset. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. I knew that between us there would always be a distance, but at least he had found the courage to face the truth. And, for me, that was enough. I folded the letter again, held it tightly for a few seconds, then let the wind take it. The paper spun upward, catching the light as it drifted higher, before settling onto the water and floating away weightless, like a bird finding its freedom. I watched it go, saying nothing. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like a woman simply letting go of a piece of paper. But for me, it was more. It was the moment I released years of expectation, guilt, and promises that were never kept. The sun slipped behind the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs and feels like the first true breath you've ever taken. In my head, my own voice rose, soft, steady, and certain. They taught me that family is everything. But no one ever taught me that sometimes you have to leave your family to find yourself. I stood there until the first lights flickered on around the lake. I didn't know where life would take me next. Maybe I'd fall in love. Maybe I'd just keep writing and living quietly in this city. But I knew one thing for sure. I had come back to myself, whole and free. As I left the pier, I glanced back at the water one last time. The paper had already sunk, leaving only ripples spreading outward, fading into stillness. I smiled, pulled my coat closer, and walked away. Inside, there was no echo of pain anymore. Only silence, the kind of peace I had spent half my life searching for, and at last had found.